The judo master on the mat did not know who he had just invited to demonstrate. The tournament organizers did not know. The 200 spectators filling the wooden bleachers of the university gymnasium did not know. Only 3 people in that entire hall knew who the slim young man in the black t-shirt was. The man who had just been referred to as the young civilian. The man who had just been asked to come forward so that a judo champion could demonstrate a hip throw on him. The man who weighed 61 kilograms and looked like a curious student who had wandered in to watch. In the next 8 minutes, one of the most respected judo authorities in America would have his understanding of combat fundamentally challenged. His textbook throws, his decades of training, his unbroken record of randori demonstrations. Everything he believed about the inevitability of ground fighting would be questioned by a man he had assumed knew nothing about real grappling. He had picked the wrong demonstration partner. It happened on a spring evening in 1965. This is the story that changed how traditional Japanese martial arts viewed Chinese fighting systems. The gymnasium had been converted into a makeshift martial arts venue for the night. Folding mats covered the hardwood floor in overlapping sections, their edges taped down with silver duct tape. Wooden bleachers lined 3 walls, creaking under the weight of approximately 200 spectators. The air smelled of tatami, sweat, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that drifted in from the hallway where people gathered during breaks. This was a cross-style martial arts exhibition, one of Ed Parker's ambitious attempts to bridge the widening gap between traditional Japanese arts, American adaptations, and the emerging Chinese martial arts community on the West Coast. It was not a competition, it was supposed to be educational, respectful, an opportunity for practitioners of different styles to observe one another, exchange ideas, and perhaps discover common ground. The audience was diverse. Judo players in heavy white gi with colored belts sat in clusters, their arms folded across their chests. Karateka in lighter uniforms occupied another section, whispering among themselves. A few boxers in street clothes leaned against the wall, skeptical but curious. And scattered throughout were the early enthusiasts of kung fu. Young men with long hair, some wearing Chinese slippers, drawn by rumors that something different was happening in the martial arts world of San Francisco. The evening had proceeded smoothly so far. A karate demonstration, a boxing exhibition, a brief talk on the philosophy of judo, and now, the highlight of the evening, a demonstration by Takashi Yamamoto. Anyone familiar with judo in America in 1965 knew this name. Takashi Yamamoto was not just skilled, he was revered. A 6th-dan judo master, who had been personally invited from Japan to tour the United States, conducting seminars and demonstrations at universities and dojos across the country. He was 40 years old, 1.85 meters tall, 95 kilograms of perfectly conditioned power. His specialties were hip throws, goshi, harai, goshi, uchi, mata, and once an opponent hit the ground, the match was effectively over. His groundwork was suffocating. His control was absolute in every city he visited. Yamamoto had offered the same demonstration randori with local practitioners, controlled sparring designed to showcase the principles of judo. In 12 cities across 3 months, he had not been challenged successfully. Not once. Every volunteer who stepped onto the mat with him ended up on their back, controlled immobilized, forced to tap out, or simply held in place until the demonstration concluded. Yamamoto was not arrogant in the Western sense. He did not boast, he did not mock his opponents, but he carried a certainty, a quiet superiority that came from decades of training in a system he believed to be complete. He believed, as many judoka did in 1965, that all fights eventually went to the ground. That stand-up striking arts, karate, boxing, kung fu, were incomplete because they did not address what happened after the throw, and Yamamoto had thrown everyone. Tonight, he stood at the center of the mat, wearing his pristine white judogi. His black belt was worn but dignified, the fabric soft from years of use. He had just finished throwing 2 volunteers, both karate practitioners, both respectable martial artists. Both had ended up on their backs within seconds, tapping frantically as Yamamoto applied a gentle but inescapable arm lock. The audience applauded, respectful, impressed. Yamamoto bowed to his volunteers, helped them to their feet, and turned to address the crowd. Ed Parker stood at the edge of the mat, holding a microphone. He was the host, the organizer, the man responsible for bringing these different communities together. He was also nervous, though. Only a handful of people would have recognized the tension in his jaw. Yamamoto spoke in accented but clear English. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a teacher who had explained these concepts 1,000 times. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, What you have just witnessed is the fundamental principle of Judo. All combat, no matter how it begins, eventually moves to close range. And at close range, the fighter who controls balance, who understands Kuzushi, off-balancing, and who can execute throws and ground techniques will always prevail. Stand-up fighting is important, yes, but it is incomplete without the understanding of what happens when bodies collide, when distance closes, when the fight goes to the ground. He paused. The audience was listening intently. I say this not to diminish other arts. Karate is beautiful. Boxing is powerful. But these arts do not fully prepare you for what happens when an opponent grabs you, when they close the distance, when they take you down. This is not opinion. This is physics. This is human anatomy. This is reality. The judoka in the audience nodded. Some of the karateka shifted uncomfortably. The boxers remained impassive. And in the back row of the bleachers, a slim young man in a black t-shirt and dark slacks sat completely still, watching. Yamamoto smiled. A courteous smile. I would like to demonstrate one more technique, a basic hip throw, ogashi, very fundamental. I would like to show how simple it is to take an opponent to the ground, even someone who resists. Would anyone be willing to assist me? Silence. The volunteers who had already been thrown were not eager to repeat the experience. The judoka in the audience knew better than to volunteer against a sixth. Dan Master, the karateka hesitated. No one moved. Yamamoto waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds, the silence began to feel awkward. Then his gaze swept across the bleachers and settled on someone in the back row. A young man, Asian, small frame. No uniform, no belt, no patches. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt and dark slacks. He looked like a student who had wandered in out of curiosity. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. He looked entirely unremarkable. But something about the way this young man was watching caught Yamamoto. His attention, he was not watching like a spectator watches entertainment. He was watching the way a mechanic watches an engine, studying, analyzing, taking things apart in his mind. Yamamoto did not think about it too long. He needed a volunteer. This young man would be perfect. Small enough to make the throw easy to execute. Civilian enough to illustrate the principle clearly. The audience would see this slender figure standing next to the judo master, and they would understand immediately the effectiveness of proper technique over size and strength. Yamamoto gestured toward the back row, young man, in the black shirt. Would you be willing to assist me? I promise to be gentle. No experience is necessary. A few people in the audience chuckled. They felt sympathy for the young man. They assumed he did not know what he was getting himself into. The young man in the black shirt looked at Yamamoto, looked at the mat, looked at the audience. Then he stood up. He moved through the bleachers with an unhurried grace, his footwork precise but unshowy. He reached the mat, stepped onto the folded surface, and walked toward Yamamoto. Ed Parker, standing at the edge of the mat, felt his stomach drop. He recognized that walk. He recognized that posture. He leaned over to the man sitting closest to him, a local judo instructor named Henry. "Oh no," Ed whispered. Henry frowned. "What? That is Bruce Lee," Henry blinked. "Who is Bruce Lee?" Ed Parker did not answer. He was already preparing himself for what was about to happen. Yamamoto and Bruce Lee stood face to face on the mat. The contrast was striking. Yamamoto towered over Bruce by 15 centimeters. He outweighed him by at least 30 kilograms. His judogi was traditional, formal, a symbol of rank and decades of training. Bruce was wearing street clothes, no belt, no rank, no indication that he had ever set foot in a martial arts school. Yamamoto smiled and extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Yamamoto noticed two things. First, the handshake was unusually firm for a man of Bruce's size. Not aggressive, but solid, like grasping a steel cable wrapped in warm flesh. Second, Bruce's forearms were disproportionately thick and muscular. The forearms of a man who did something very specific with his hands for many hours every day. Yamamoto dismissed both observations. Grip strength did not prevent throws. Forearms did not change the laws of physics. "What is your name?" Yamamoto asked politely. "Bruce Lee." The name meant nothing to him. Yamamoto had never heard it before. "Do you practice any martial arts?" "Yes." "What style?" "Chinese martial arts." Yamamoto nodded. He had an opinion about Chinese martial arts. Though he would never say it aloud in such a public setting, in the judo community of 1965, Kung Fu was considered theatrical, beautiful to watch, completely impractical against a grappler. Lots of forms and stances and movements that looked impressive in demonstrations, but collapsed the moment someone closed the distance and executed a real throw with real intention. Yamamoto turned slightly to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a volunteer. Please give him a round of applause for his courage. Polite applause. The audience felt sympathy for Bruce. They assumed he was about to be embarrassed. Yamamoto turned back to Bruce, lowering his voice to a private tone. I will demonstrate a basic hip throw. Oh, Goshi, I will not hurt you. Just relax. Allow me to control your balance and I will guide you to the mat safely. Do you understand? Bruce nodded. I understand. Good. Are you ready? I am ready. Yamamoto assumed his judo stance, feet shoulder, width apart, knees slightly bent, hands up and open, ready to grip. Bruce stood in the center of the mat, completely neutral, no stance, no guard. Hands at his sides, feet shoulder, width apart. He looked like someone waiting for a bus. 200 people in the gymnasium held their breath. Yamamoto stepped forward. He reached for Bruce's clothing. There was no GI to grip, so he grasped the fabric of Bruce's ST shirt at the shoulder and hip. He executed the entry for O, Goshi, with textbook precision. His right foot stepped between Bruce's feet. His hips rotated. His left arm wrapped around Bruce's torso. He bent his knees, loaded Bruce's weight onto his hips, and executed the throw. Bruce went down smoothly. Lightly, the audience murmured approval. A clean technique, perfectly executed. But something was wrong. Yamamoto felt it immediately. Bruce's body had no resistance, no tension, no struggle. He had not gone down like someone being thrown against their will. He had gone down like water flowing downhill. And the moment Bruce's back touched the mat, he rolled. A compact, controlled roll, and was back on his feet in less than a second. Not in front of Yamamoto, where a thrown opponent would normally stand, but inside Yamamoto's range, close. Too close. Yamamoto blinked. He had thrown thousands of people. No one recovered that quickly. No one ended up inside his range after being thrown. Bruce was standing an arm's length away, his posture neutral, his expression unchanged. Yamamoto smiled. He had expected resistance eventually. He gestured. Again, this time, resist if you like. Bruce did not move, if you wish. Yamamoto approached again. This time he committed harder. He gripped Bruce's shoulder and hip more firmly, stepped in with full intention, rotated his hips, bent his knees, and lifted with a power that had sent 220-pound men flying through the air. The technique never completed. At the exact moment Yamamoto committed his weight to the throw, Bruce moved. Not backward, not resisting forward. A tiny step barely visible, but perfectly timed. His left foot trapped Yamamoto's right foot. His right foot shifted outward, creating a wedge, and suddenly Yamamoto felt his hips empty. The weight he had expected to load onto his center disappeared. He stumbled forward half a step, his balance compromised, his throw aborted. Bruce placed a light palm on Yamamoto. His chest, not a push, not a strike, a placement. A marker that said, here, this is where I would hit you, this is where it would end. The touch was so gentle it would not have disturbed a butterfly, but the meaning was unmistakable. Yamamoto caught himself, straightened, and looked at Bruce with new eyes. The young man's expression had not changed. No triumph, no satisfaction, just calm observation. The audience was silent. They did not understand what they had just seen, but they sensed something had shifted. Yamamoto's smile had changed. The courteous condescension was gone. In its place was curiosity, genuine interest. He had thrown thousands of people. He had never felt his throw neutralized so completely with so little effort. Again, Yamamoto said. This time it was not a demonstration. It was a question. Bruce nodded. Yamamoto approached a third time. This time he abandoned the careful demonstration technique. This time he moved with the speed and intention he would use in randori against a fellow black belt. He closed the distance in a single explosive step, gripped Bruce's shoulder and hip, rotated his hips, and executed a harai. Goshi, a sweeping hip throw. With full commitment, Bruce intercepted the intention. The audience gasped. Bruce stepped forward into the preparation phase of Yamamoto's throw. His left hand deflected Yamamoto's gripping hand with a short circular motion. His right elbow checked Yamamoto's chest at the exact moment. Yamamoto's hips began to rotate, and his right knee, barely visible in the tangle of movement, pressed against Yamamoto's right thigh, disrupting the sweep before it could develop power. Yamamoto's throw never materialized. He was suddenly turned, off, balanced, his weight shifted forward onto his toes. Bruce's right hand touched his back, a light push, and Yamamoto stumbled 2 steps before catching himself. The gymnasium erupted, not applause, confusion, arguments. People stood up. They pointed at the mat. They turned to their neighbors, demanding explanations. Judoka shook their heads. Karateka leaned forward. The boxers were grinning. On the mat, Yamamoto stood completely still. His chest was heaving, not from physical exertion, but from the effort of rearranging his understanding of what had just happened. For 40 years, he had believed that a properly executed judo throw was inevitable, that if you achieved kuzushi and committed your technique, the opponent would fall. It was physics, it was anatomy, it was reality. Bruce Lee had just suggested reality had exceptions. Yamamoto turned to Bruce. For the first time, there was no condescension in his voice. No courteous superiority, just honest inquiry. How? He asked. Bruce looked at him with the calm expression of a teacher who had been waiting for this exact question. Would you like me to explain? Yamamoto nodded without hesitation. Yes. Ed Parker approached the mat. He understood the moment, recognized what was happening in that gymnasium. 200 martial artists had just witnessed something they could not explain within their existing framework of knowledge. Such moments could go two ways. They could lead to curiosity and growth, or they could lead to defensiveness and rejection. Ed Parker's job was to steer the room toward curiosity. He handed the microphone to Bruce. Bruce, would you be willing to show everyone what just happened? Perhaps explain the principles? Bruce took the microphone. He looked out at the audience. 200 faces looked back at him, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. He could feel the tension in the room. These were judoka, karateka, serious practitioners who had spent years mastering their arts. And a small man in street clothes had just neutralized one of the most respected judo masters in America. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Bruce understood that. He had swallowed similar pills himself, years ago in Hong Kong, when his own assumptions had been shattered by experience. I would be happy to, Bruce said. His voice was clear, unhurried. It carried effortlessly through the gymnasium without shouting. He began simply, respectfully. What you just saw was not magic. It was not superior strength. It was not luck. It was timing. Specific timing applied to the structure of human movement in a way that most grappling arts do not emphasize. He paused, let the words settle. Master Yamamoto is an exceptional judoka, truly exceptional. His technique is perfect. His throws are powerful and precise. But every throw, every single throw in judo, in wrestling, in any grappling art, has a preparatory phase. A moment when the attacker must shift their weight, adjust their grip, position their hips. These preparations are tiny fractions of a second, but they are visible. They are readable. And if you can read the preparation, you can intercept the technique before it develops power. The judoka in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Bruce was describing something they all knew instinctively but had never articulated. The setup every throw had one. It was accepted as inevitable. You had to prepare before you threw. You had to establish kuzushi before you could execute. That was how grappling worked. That was how the human body worked. Bruce continued, in the system I am developing, Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, we do not wait for the attack to complete. We intercept the attack during its preparatory phase. We do not defend against the throw. We destroy the throw before it exists. He turned to Yamamoto. Master Yamamoto, may I demonstrate something? Yamamoto nodded. The resistance he had felt earlier had given way entirely to curiosity. He wanted to understand. Please try to throw me again. Full commitment, full power. Yamamoto assumed his stance. The audience tensed. After what they had just witnessed, this felt like watching someone reach for a hot stove a fourth time. Yamamoto executed a clean entry for uchi mata, an inner thigh throw. Fast, committed, full power. Bruce did not retreat. He stepped forward directly into the throw. His left hand touched Yamamoto's right elbow, not blocking, redirecting, a circular motion that used Yamamoto's momentum to turn his body. At the same time, Bruce's right hand touched Yamamoto's chest. Not a push, a placement, a physical note that said, here, this is where I would strike. This is where it would end. Yamamoto's throw flew past Bruce's left hip. Bruce stood inside Yamamoto's defense. One hand on his chest, completely in control. He held the position for 3 seconds so everyone could see. Then he released Yamamoto and stepped back. Did you see what happened? Bruce asked the audience. I did not block his throw. Blocking is a reaction. Reactions are always slower than actions. Instead, I intercepted his throw during the preparatory phase. The moment I felt his weight shift, the moment I sensed his intention, I moved forward. Not backward forward. I entered the space where his balance was committed to the technique and could not be recovered. He paused. The gymnasium was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. This is the principle of interception. Do not defend. Do not react. Intercept, attack the preparation, not the attack, the audience process. 200 minds were recalculating everything they had been taught about timing, distance, and the fundamental architecture of combat. Bruce spent the next 5 minutes demonstrating concept after concept, each one simple, each one revolutionary to an audience trained in traditional grappling systems. He demonstrated the centerline theory from Wing Chun. The idea that the most efficient path between two fighters is a straight line along the center, and that controlling that line provides a structural advantage regardless of size or strength. He asked Yamamoto to grip his wrists. Then he asked Yamamoto to try to control him while he tried to touch Yamamoto's face. The exercise looked simple. Two men, wrists gripped, trying to find an opening. Yamamoto could not touch Bruce, not once. Every time Yamamoto moved, Bruce's hands were already there. They deflected fluidly. They found the gaps Yamamoto's movements created and exploited them. Yamamoto's hands kept hitting Bruce's forearms. Bruce's hands kept appearing in front of Yamamoto's face, his chest, his throat, lightly, gently, but undeniably. This is sensitivity training, Bruce explained as his hands continued to flow around Yamamoto's attempts. In Wing Chun we call it chi sao, sticky hands. We train to sense an opponent's intention through physical contact. When your hand touches mine, I can feel where you are moving before you get there. Your muscles tense before they move. Your weight shifts before you execute your technique. I do not need to see your attack. I can feel it coming. Yamamoto's face was a study in cognitive dissonance. He was a sixth Dan. His reflexes were world-class. And this man, smaller, lighter, with half-closed eyes during the drill, was reading him like a book with large print. Bruce released Yamamoto's wrists. One more demonstration, if I may. Yamamoto nodded, no longer hesitant. His pride had given way entirely to the hunger to understand. Master Yamamoto, Bruce said, please stand firm, distribute your weight, prepare for impact. Yamamoto widened his stance, lowered his center of gravity, tensed his core. He was 95 kilograms of trained muscle, rooted to the mat. Bruce placed his fist against Yamamoto's chest, 1 inch between his knuckles and the judogi, no room for momentum, no room for swing, no room for anything the judo world would recognize as power generation. Ready? Bruce asked. Ready? Bruce struck 1 inch. The sound was soft, a dull, compact thud. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Yamamoto flew backward, not metaphorically, physically. His feet lost contact with the mat. His body traveled through the air. He landed 3 feet back, stumbling, catching himself before he fell. The gymnasium exploded. People stood up. They shouted. They pointed. Some laughed, not at Yamamoto, but at the sheer impossibility of what they had just witnessed. A 1-inch strike had sent a 95-kilogram man flying backward. The laws of physics, as they understood them, had just made an exception. Bruce helped Yamamoto regain his balance. Yamamoto was grinning, not the courteous smile from earlier. A different grin, the grin of a man who had just discovered that his map of the world was incomplete, that there were territories he had never explored, that even if you are a master in one system, you are still far from understanding what other systems can teach. How? Yamamoto asked, brushing off his gi. 1 inch. How is that possible? It is not about the inch, Bruce said. It is about the body behind the inch. The power does not come from my fist. It comes from my entire structure. Every joint, every muscle, every tendon aligned in a single direction. In a single moment, the fist is just the last link in the chain. The chain starts at the ground. Bruce turned to address the full audience. His voice had changed slightly, less clinical, more personal. I want to make one thing very clear. I am not here to disparage Judo. Judo is one of the most sophisticated martial arts in the world. Master Yamamoto is an exceptional practitioner. His dedication, his technique, his understanding of kuzushi and groundwork, these are achievements that deserve profound respect. He paused, looked around the room, made eye contact with as many people as possible. But if you want to grow, if you want to evolve, if you want to discover what you are truly capable of, you must be willing to look beyond the boundaries of your style. Every martial art has strengths. Every martial art has limitations. The question is not, which style is the best? The question is, are you willing to recognize your own limitations? Are you brave enough to admit that your system does not have all the answers? His voice grew quieter but somehow more penetrating. Because the moment you admit that, the moment you open yourself to learning, you become dangerous. Not because of what you know, but because of what you are willing to discover. The applause that followed was not polite. It was not the applause of an audience appreciating a performance. It was the sound of 200 people whose minds had been forcibly opened. Some of them would close those minds again by morning. They would return to their dojos, their routines, their kata and randori, and they would convince themselves that what they had seen was a trick, an anomaly, a one-time fluke. But some of them would never close their minds again. Some of them would lie awake tonight, replaying what they had seen over and over, feeling the cracks in their worldview widen into doorways, and some of them would walk through those doorways. And their martial arts would never be the same. Ed Parker took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Lee. The applause lasted nearly a minute. Bruce bowed. A small, precise bow, respectful, not theatrical. He stepped off the mat, walked through the audience, and returned to his seat in the back row. The exhibition ended 30 minutes later. The gymnasium slowly emptied. Judoka packed their belts into bags. Karateka folded their uniforms. Families gathered their coats. But every conversation in that room was about the same thing. The small man in the black t-shirt. The throw that never landed. The 1-inch punch. The 8 minutes that challenged 40 years of assumptions. The parking lot was nearly empty when Takashi Yamamoto walked out into the cool evening air. He was still wearing his judogi. His black belt was tied loosely around his waist. He had left the gymnasium quietly, avoiding the clusters of people who wanted to ask him questions he did not yet know how to answer. He saw Bruce Lee loading a small bag into the trunk of a car. A friend, the man Ed Parker had called James Lee, sat in the driver's seat, waiting. The engine was running. Yamamoto approached. He was still processing what had happened. His mind was running through the 8 minutes on the mat over and over, trying to understand how his throws, techniques he had executed 10,000 times, had simply dissolved. Mr. Lee, Bruce turned. He saw Yamamoto. He waited. I owe you an apology, Yamamoto said. His English was careful, but his sincerity was unmistakable. I invited you to the mat because I thought you were a civilian, because I wanted to demonstrate my technique on someone who would not resist effectively, because I assumed your Chinese martial arts had no answer to judo. Bruce said nothing. He let Yamamoto speak. For 20 years, I have believed that all fights go to the ground, that grappling is inevitable, that throws cannot be stopped by striking arts. Tonight you showed me that I was wrong, not wrong about judo, wrong about my assumptions, wrong about what I thought was possible. He paused. The parking lot was silent except for the distant sound of traffic. Can you teach me what you showed me tonight? Bruce looked at him the way he had looked at him on the mat. Not at his posture, not at his technique, at his eyes. What lived behind them? What had changed? You do not need me to teach you, Bruce said quietly. You need to teach yourself a different question. What question? For 20 years, you have been asking, how do I execute my technique perfectly? That is a good question. It has made you a master, but it is not the only question. The better question is, what happens when my technique meets someone who does not follow the rules I expect? What do I do when my assumptions fail? Yamamoto stared at him. The moment you ask that question honestly, Bruce continued, every person you meet becomes your teacher. Every style you encounter becomes your classroom. You do not need me. You need the courage to feel uncomfortable. Yamamoto was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed. A deep, formal bow, not the bow of defeat. The bow of a student who has just met a teacher he did not know he needed. Thank you, Yamamoto said, for the lesson. Thank you, Bruce replied, for being willing to learn. He got into the car. James Lee looked at him, grinning. You know what is going to happen now, right? Everyone in that gym is going to tell someone else, and those people are going to tell someone else. Next month, every martial artist in California is going to know your name. Bruce was silent for a moment. Then he said something James Lee would remember for the rest of his life. Good, Bruce said. Then next time, they will not assume the small man in the back row knows nothing. The car pulled out of the parking lot. The gymnasium shrank in the rearview mirror. Inside, 200 people were still talking about what they had seen. They would talk about it tomorrow. They would talk about it next week. They would talk about it for decades. Because on that spring evening in 1965, a judo master invited a small man in a black t-shirt to demonstrate a hip throw. He did not know he had chosen Bruce Lee. Now, an entire martial arts community would never forget. Within 3 weeks, the story had spread through every judo dojo in California. Within 2 months, it reached the East Coast. By the end of the year, Japanese instructors in Kyoto and Tokyo had heard variations of the tale, a Chinese martial artist in San Francisco who had neutralized a sixth Dan judoka without using a single traditional judo technique. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others demanded details. A few began experimenting with pre-interception drills in their own schools, trying to understand how to attack a throw before it developed. Takashi Yamamoto returned to Japan 6 months later. He did not speak publicly about what happened that night in San Francisco, but those who trained with him noticed a change. He began asking his students unusual questions. What if your opponent does not resist the way you expect? What if they move forward instead of backward? What if they intercept your setup? He incorporated sensitivity drills into his randori training. He invited karateka and kung fu practitioners to visit his dojo. He became known, in his later years, not as the master who was undefeated, but as the master who was unafraid to question. And when students asked him about the rumor, the story of the small Chinese man who stopped his throws, Yamamoto would smile and say only this: "I learned more in 8 minutes on a mat in San Francisco than I learned in 8 years of winning competitions. Because winning teaches you what you already know. Losing teaches you what you need to learn." Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about the incident. He did not need to. His students spread the story. The witnesses spread the story. And within 2 years, when Bruce Lee walked into a martial arts gathering anywhere on the West Coast, people knew who he was, not because of what he had won, but because of what he had revealed. On that spring evening in 1965, a judo master reached for a throw and grasped the future of martial arts instead. He just did not know it yet.